Hi there, so this video is about Sharpening Rex 121. This is a Spyderco Sage 5 FRN handled, and it's in the Rex 121, which according to Spyderco is aimed at between 67 and 70 Rockwell. And on the Spyderco forums I noticed a post from Sal confirming that I've seen a couple of samples in the mid 68s. So it's a very hard steel with pretty advanced materials inside it. If you think of a usual steel being like largely iron, like 99% iron, 1% carbon, that'd be a decent carbon steel, with a few other trace elements in it. This you're looking at about a 58 to 60% iron content, and then the rest is some pretty exotic carbide formers like tungsten, vanadium. It's got some cobalt, some chromium, and of course a pretty hefty dose of plain old carbon as well. So pretty advanced stuff, and the question is no doubt going to be, what on earth am I going to need to sharpen a knife made of such material? So what I did was I started from the most basic, and I sort of moved steps up in terms of advanced kit to see what I could comfortably and just generally recommend as a starting point for sharpening Rex 121. And this video is probably also applicable to something like Maximet, CPM 110V, those really high Rockwell, high alloy steels with lots of sort of exotic components in them. So what I started on first was my most basic stone, which is the Spyderco Medium. So as far as I'm aware, the Spyderco Medium is about a 600 grit. It's a dry stone, so you don't use any water on it. A very simple bench stone. And it's a stone that in my experience is absolutely fine on S30V type steels, VG10, it's great for that. Your more basic Spyderco steels that I guess you've been seeing in Spydercos for 20 years that they've been making the stone. I used it, and I used it as if I was just sharpening any other knife. And what I had done was put a decent chip in the blade. So before I started the sharpening, just as a bit of a toughness test and as a bit of a comparison point, I wanted to see how it compared to crewware in terms of a bit of a contrived test, I suppose, but how it took a chip. I just lightly sort of battened the knife through a paper clip using the sort of rubberized end of the hammer. And a few impact points on not a paper clip, on a safety pin. So a safety pin is sprung steel, and it is not a fragile steel, and it is I knew it would do some damage to the edge. That was my intention. So I was left with a pretty ragged chip, a pair of chips on this edge, and the crewware, it made sort of smaller indentations that looked more akin to a pressing in, whereas this definitely sort of chipped out. So that's kind of how I would describe it, just from my layman's terms. So anyway, it gave me something to fix with the sharpening stones. So the Spyderco Medium. The Spyderco Medium really seemed to polish what I had already. So I did pretty much standard sharpening motions, trying to just repeat the factory edge, chasing back to that chip. What you generally do if you have a bad chip in a blade, you'll see a lot of professionals do, is they'll put the knife sort of blade down and even out the whole edge, basically take the whole edge back like 0.5 millimeter, catch up with that chip, and then put a whole new edge on entirely. What I have the habit of doing is just keeping on sharpening and sort of chasing that chip back. So eventually the apex does catch up. It's a longer way of doing it, but it's kind of how I know how I'm more comfortable doing it. So I was trying to do that, and on the Spyderco Medium stone, I didn't have a great deal of luck. It was a pretty, it made what is generally a pretty decent stock removing stone feel like a really smooth, almost toothless stone. And that wasn't surprising at all. This is a really hard material. It's probably not harder than the stone, but definitely going to challenge the aluminum oxide surface of that stone. The fact that it was sort of polishing did indicate some stock removal, but it really did seem like it would have taken a long, long time. And with freehand sharpening like that, the longer you take, the more prone you're going to get to fatigue and mistakes. So I wouldn't recommend that for sharpening this stone. So then I moved up my collection, staying with ceramic stones. I went to my Shaptons and my Shapton 320 Kuramaku. So this is a splash and go stone, and it's a fairly rough grit, and I sharpened for about sort of 7 minutes, just repeating strokes, much longer than you would usually spend on that stone for sure. This is really a profiling stone. Get that initial bevel, which you'll then move up quickly once that bevel is set. This felt like a much finer stone. So what this knife seems to do on stones like that is, say if it's a 320 grit, it made it feel like it was sort of an 800 grit. So that's kind of the feedback you get. And that's what I would, how I would sort of, in my very layman's terms, equate it and sort of how it seems to be behaving against stones like that. What I was happy with though was that it definitely did remove stock. So I could theoretically have done the full sharpening job, at least to get the chip out on that stone. I spent a lot of time on it, and when I took it to the microscope again, I noticed one chip was entirely gone and the other one was definitely going. So I would say that it is possible to resharpen this on something like a Shapton series of Kuramakus. Absolutely possible. But what that does bring up is the question of carbide tear out. So let's talk quickly about that. Alrighty, so carbide tear out. So say this, let's look at this little portion of the edge. Let's blow it up. Let's magnify it to that portion there is this here, and that's just that tiny little portion. So say on this edge, right, you've got vanadium carbide, you've got a tungsten carbide, you've got another vanadium carbide, you've got a tungsten carbide, vanadium carbide, tungsten carbide, vanadium carbide, tungsten carbide, right? So these are the carbides that are doing the cutting, a lot of the cutting anyway. The rest of it is like a carbon iron, matrix of kind of like a frosting that's holding the sprinkles on the surface of the cake. Now the theory is if you're using stones that aren't harder than these carbides, they are left by the sharpening process almost completely untouched. And what you're actually doing is sharpening this stuff back here, right? So say we're voiding this stuff back. So pretending that there's going to be, whatever I've colored in black is actually gone. We're going to then have the carbides hanging out a little bit further again. And so the idea is then, theoretically, that they can quite easily just kind of go ping and fall out from the edge when they do cutting. So if it snags on a bit of cardboard or something, there is less of this stuff that's holding them in. So that is a really, really dumb guy version of carbide tear out. I don't know how applicable it is. I'm just truly saying what the theory is. There are other videos, other people much smarter than me about metallurgy, about knife sharpening, about knife making that can speak to you better. I would say just look up the term carbide tear out. That is something that I will certainly allude to is possible, or is apparently possible, when you're just using sort of your more sort of ceramic type stones on these high carbide, high end steels. So just thought I'd cover that off. Let's get back to it. So the safest thing for this sort of steel, in my opinion, is going to be a diamond sharpener. So what do you need? Do you need a crazy TS Prof or $500 KME or Work Sharp fixed angle system? Absolutely not. So I moved up to the very basic, actually cheaper stone than the two I've already used, and that is, say it with me probably, the Work Sharp guided field sharpener. It's one of the best things you can buy if you're a knife guy, indispensable tool. It is 2 diamond plates, a ceramic rod, and a sort of a loaded leather stropping, back part of the, I'm losing my words. And that's what it is, all in one sort of one-stop sharpening shop. And as such, quite unsurprisingly, the diamond quality on these, especially on the new one that I had, that's kind of the maiden voyage of this first one, really did take the edge back really, really well, and put a, basically as factory looking edge on it. Now, my angle was not as good as the factory angle. It was largely boiled back to about a 20-degree angle once I'd caught the chips, and so I wasn't expecting such a great edge performance as perhaps the 18-degree-ish edge that it came with, and it really did come with a great factory edge. So tip of the hat to Spyderco for that. So the rough, then the fine diamond, and then the ceramic to deburr, and then the leather strop. I ended up with an edge that looked really good. It did still look like it was holding a little bit of a burr on it. I couldn't get it off there. That's just how it looked. So I thought, screw it, I'll cut with it anyway. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's the jagged edge of finishing with a fairly roughish diamond stone. So I thought, screw it, we'll go and see how it goes. And this isn't the number that it got in the initial test. So in the initial test, I believe this got 2,100 cuts through twisted sisal rope, which was insane. Best steel result I've ever had, and even better being a factory edge, which is usually fine but never great. My pretty backyard, very much rushed Work Sharp knife and tool, field sharpen edge got 1,460 cuts of rope before it is still only slightly dull. So this is still a sharp knife. I would absolutely cut myself with this if I push my finger in much harder. It is still taking off little bits of skin with me as I run my finger along the edge. It is still an extremely sharp knife. All it's done is stopped easily slicing, gliding through a sheet of paper at 1460 cuts at about a 20-degree, very sort of haphazardly done, repaired edge on a workshop guided field sharpener. So that is, I would say, the benchmark, like the baseline for where you need to, equipment you need to start sharpening your X121 knife. Now, 1460 cuts at the workshop 20-degree edge, that's really, really good. It's and you can tweak it a little bit. You can start a bit lower on the stone and maybe do a 17-degree. You don't have to use the guides. I just kind of used it as my hands were sort of guided to by it. So it's certainly not the best you could possibly do on that as well. I'm really just trying stuff out here. So I'd absolutely say that fear not if you own this Rex 121. You don't need to go and buy an expensive kit to sharpen it. A bit of practice and a good quality diamond stone is all you're going to need. And Workshop's good quality diamond stones, that's what, $60, $70 for an all-in-one kit. So it's absolutely manageable, absolutely doable on pretty rudimentary gear. That being said, in the next video, I'm going to put on the best edge I possibly can, see if I can break that factory edge record. I want to get it up to, over 2100 cuts, see if I can anyway. I'm not sure if I'll be able to. I don't know what kind of edge this is going to do best with as well. Maybe that's the best kind of edge for it. Maybe a 800-ish diamond finish in a strop. It would make sense. There is a school of thought that that is what these high carbide steels like. So we'll see a few more videos to come out on this steel. I'm just having a great time with it. Very fascinating stuff to me. Thank you for watching. Hope this was of interest. Can't say it enough. That guided field sharpener is fucking great. And I'm definitely enjoying this steel as well. So just as an aside, I've not been taking particularly good care of this stuff either. I've been cutting things, not washing it, not wiping it down. And yeah, just so you know, it's definitely not rusting, anything like that. It's absolutely being, other steels that have been treated as poorly have definitely shown signs of rust already. So it's kind of got that, a lot of these high-speed steels, I think because the iron content starts to go so far down, they do seem a little bit less rustable. So maybe that's what's going on there too. So look, overall, my impressions of this knife are very strong. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how the steel's turning out. So definitely work in progress. See you on the next video. Thank you and goodbye.